A young woman's routine jog transformed into an unimaginable tragedy. From the outset, the case gripped Ireland, sparking outrage across the nation. Detectives faced immense pressure, but their investigation yielded a revelation so shocking it defied comprehension. Ashling Murphy was born on July 6, 1998, in the quiet Irish village of Blue Ball. Ashling grew up surrounded by a loving family, including older siblings. Music was the lifeblood of their home, and she took to the violin at a young age. Years of dedication followed, with Ashling honing her skills. She graced school concerts, played in the orchestra, and eventually ranked among the top 5% of violinists in Ireland. However, music wasn't her only passion. From her school days, Ashling harbored a dream of becoming a teacher. She pursued her education diligently, and in March of 2021, at the age of 22, she achieved her goal, stepping into a classroom as a primary school teacher. From the moment Ashling started her job, she was adored by both her students and new colleagues. Her approach to teaching was one of unwavering dedication, always striving to make learning a captivating experience. Moreover, Ashling and her fiancé, Ryan, were making plans to get married in the near future, begin building their dream home together, and start a family. It seemed as though she had everything she could ever wish for, with a long and happy life stretching before her. However, at the beginning of 2022, all of this changed in an instant. On the 12th of January, Ashling finished her school day and decided to go for a run. She was a dedicated athlete and tried to make the most of every free moment, regardless of the weather. She often ran along the canal that ran through the town of Tullamore. The route was a beloved spot for locals, a place where they walked their dogs, enjoyed bike rides, or simply strolled along the water's edge. Before heading out for a run, Ashling told her mother her plans, but the woman was suddenly filled with unease. She asked Ashling to choose another route, but Ashling reassured her that she would be fine, hugged her mother, and left. Around 3:15 in the afternoon, two other women jogging along the canal path noticed an abandoned bicycle on the side of the road. Moments later, they heard what sounded like muffled cries coming from the wooded area to the left of the path. Thinking someone had fallen off their bike and needed help, they headed toward the sound, but were met with a horrifying scene. They saw a young woman on the ground, a man looming over her with a knife. She was struggling, but he held her down. The man noticed the two women, turned to them, and yelled for them to leave. Neither of them had a phone, and there was no one else around, so they began shouting at him, demanding he release the young woman. When he didn't budge, they ran to the nearest house to call the police. Officers and paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. The attacker was gone, and his victim lay unconscious on the ground. They tried to revive her, but the young woman was pronounced dead. The police quickly identified her as Ashling Murphy. Near her hand, they found her keys, leading investigators to believe she had tried to defend herself. Medical examiners discovered 11 stab wounds on her body, as well as signs of strangulation. The cause of death was determined to be blood loss. News of Ashling's murder spread through the community within hours, shocking local residents. The area was considered safe, and such crimes were rare. Many people knew Ashling, as she worked at a local school. Police focused all their efforts on finding the attacker. They first spoke with the two women who had witnessed the assault, who provided a description of the man. Unfortunately, the women were some distance away and couldn't clearly see his face, but they were able to give a detailed description of his clothing. Additionally, police determined that the abandoned bicycle likely belonged to the attacker. He had apparently fled on foot, leaving it behind. Investigators impounded the bike and released its image to the media, hoping someone could identify the owner. They also began reviewing security camera footage in an attempt to find the attacker. They soon found him on one of the cameras, but the images were not clear enough to provide any useful details. A woman also came forward, telling police she had been walking along the canal 2 hours before Ashling's murder. She said a man on a similar bicycle had been following her for some time. She found it suspicious because he was riding very slowly, as if deliberately avoiding passing her. Yet this lead offered limited assistance to the investigators. All they could deduce was that the perpetrator might have been searching for a victim for several hours before encountering Ashling. Experts analyzed data from the victim's fitness tracker, establishing a clearer timeline. She left her home at 2:51 a.m., and 30 minutes later, the tracker began recording irregular movements. likely the moment of the assault when she tried to defend herself. At 3:31 a.m., the device ceased detecting a pulse, indicating her time of death. That same day, police announced the arrest of a 40-year-old man suspected of Ashling's murder, withholding details except that he was brought in for questioning. The following day, they cleared him, stating he had no connection to the crime. Despite the official statement, the man faced abuse and threats after his name and photo surfaced in the media. By the second day after the murder, the case dominated news headlines in Ireland. Politicians spoke out and tens of thousands gathered for impromptu vigils, demanding justice. Police informed reporters that they weren't considering any acquaintances of Ashling as suspects. The assumption that the killer drove along the canal for hours searching for a victim heightened anxiety among residents, who feared further attacks. 5 days after the murder, an unexpected email arrived at the police station. "I killed Ashling Murphy. I am very sorry." The IP address was traced to a man who claimed to have no memory of writing the email. He cited mental health issues and alcohol abuse, leading to memory gaps, and insisted on his innocence. Investigators corroborated his alibi, leading them to a significant clue. Under Ashling's fingernails, examiners found skin particles. Analysis revealed the skin belonged to an unknown man, suggesting Ashling fought back. A DNA profile was extracted, but it didn't match any databases. Nevertheless, it gave the police their first concrete evidence to directly link a suspect to the murder through DNA comparison. Additionally, investigators surmised that Ashling might have inflicted serious wounds, prompting them to contact local hospitals in case the killer sought medical attention. It wasn't long before the consequences began to surface. At a Dublin hospital, roughly 100 kilometers from the crime scene, a visitor with a scratched face and stab wounds to the abdomen raised suspicions. He'd arrived 2 days after the murder, unable to provide a plausible explanation for his injuries. Doctors determined that the wounds, particularly those on his face and abdomen, were severe enough to pose a risk to his health. Detectives promptly headed to the hospital to interview the patient, a 31-year-old man named Josef Puska. He claimed he'd been attacked by an unknown assailant wearing a medical mask, preventing him from recalling any specific details. Josef added that the assault happened so fast that he couldn't provide any additional information. The police showed him a photograph of Ashling and inquired if he knew anything about the case, but Josef claimed he didn't follow the news due to his limited English skills and had never heard of her. This account aroused the detectives' suspicion. They investigated Josef and discovered he had immigrated to Ireland from Slovakia in 2015, working as a construction worker. He lived with his wife and 2 children in a village just a couple of kilometers from where Ashling was murdered. Furthermore, his relatives owned a house in Dublin. Police decided to search both houses, as well as 2 vehicles linked to Josef. They didn't disclose whether any evidence was found, but within days they returned to the hospital to question Josef again. By then, he had undergone surgery, and investigators began re-interrogating him about his injuries. To their surprise, Josef suddenly changed his story, claiming he had been near the canal at the time of Ashling's murder. He claimed he saw a man attacking her and tried to intervene, but the attacker stabbed him several times. Naturally, the detectives didn't believe this story, as it contradicted the evidence. They continued to press him with questions until abruptly he mumbled, "I did it. I killed her. I am the murderer." The police were shocked by his confession and immediately placed him under arrest. He was to remain hospitalized for several days, so he couldn't be immediately taken into custody. Investigators said he would be formally charged upon his release and would then have the opportunity to provide a full account of his actions under interrogation. However, Josef was not to be stopped. He said that he saw a stranger and could not control himself. He attacked her, stabbed her multiple times, and strangled her actions. He explained that he simply panicked. Josef began to cry and asked the police if he was looking at a 10-year prison sentence. He then showed them his abdomen, which bore 3 stab wounds inflicted by the victim's key. Apparently, Ashling had struck him with such force that the not-so-sharp key had penetrated his abdomen. Josef also provided the police with a DNA sample, which perfectly matched the DNA extracted from skin cells found under the victim's fingernails. While investigators awaited the killer's release from the hospital, Ashling's funeral took place. The nation was gripped. Leading Irish politicians, including the president, attended the funeral, while thousands gathered outside the church. Hundreds of schools observed a moment of silence. Ashling students stood with photos of their beloved teacher. That evening, Joseph was taken into custody and brought to court. Police shielded him from an enraged crowd demanding justice. The next day, investigators revealed to the media how they had identified Joseph and disclosed previously withheld information. On the day of the murder, he had stalked at least 4 other women on his bicycle. Surveillance footage captured him, and the women recounted his suspicious behavior. One described how Joseph had initially cycled slowly behind her, then dismounted and approached. Seeing a parked car ahead, she ran towards it, prompting Joseph to flee. Another woman said he had ridden past her, making eye contact, before turning around and following her for a time. This corroborated the theory that he was intentionally seeking a victim, and these women had only escaped because of the presence of others. Surprisingly, Joseph had no prior criminal record in Ireland or his home country. In court, he suddenly claimed to have no memory of his police interview in the hospital and denied confessing to the murder. He reverted to his story that someone else had attacked Ashling and he had tried to save her, sustaining stab wounds in the process. However, he couldn't explain how his skin ended up under the victim's fingernails. His retraction of the confession meant he would face a trial, with preparations lasting many months. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the prosecution meticulously examined the case. 18 months after the murder, there was a surprising development. Police announced the arrest of 5 individuals in connection with Ashling's murder. Joseph's relatives and friends. Accusations of concealing information and obstructing the investigation were brought against several individuals. While law enforcement remained tight-lipped about the specifics of the arrests, those detained were soon released. The trial of Joseph commenced on October 17, 2023. Notably, he had been held in solitary confinement prior to the trial, his contact with other inmates restricted due to credible death threats. Joseph's attorney proclaimed his client's innocence and moved to suppress a confession Joseph made while in hospital. He argued that Joseph was under the influence of potent medication at the time, rendering him incapable of understanding his words. However, a medical expert for the prosecution refuted this claim, asserting that Joseph had not received any substances that would have caused such an effect. The defense further argued that Joseph's actions were solely aimed at saving the woman's life. When spotted by 2 witnesses, he was supposedly attempting to stop Ashling's bleeding. However, the attorney struggled to explain why his client yelled at the witnesses to flee and threatened them with death rather than asking them to call for help. The prosecution, in contrast, presented a compelling array of evidence, spearheaded by the results of DNA analysis. 2 eyewitnesses positively identified Joseph, and 4 additional women reported seeing him stalking them on his bicycle that same day. This evidence significantly bolstered the prosecution's case. The prosecution argued that Joseph had been hunting for a victim for hours, intending to assault a woman. When he spotted Ashling, he attacked, but she fought back fiercely. She scratched his face and delivered 3 powerful blows to his abdomen with her keys. Unprepared for such resistance, Joseph panicked and stabbed her 11 times before strangling her. He then fled the scene, abandoning his bicycle. 2 days later, he was admitted to the hospital due to the severity of his injuries. The trial concluded in under a month, and on November 9th, Joseph was unanimously found guilty of murder. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, he showed no remorse, often smirking. Upon arrival at the prison, Joseph was immediately placed under 24-hour surveillance due to threats from other inmates eager to confront him. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Joseph's family remains convinced of his innocence. No charges were ever brought against them following his arrest, and it is unlikely they ever will be. After the verdict, Ashling's family expressed gratitude to the legal team, the police, and the entire nation for the immense support they received during the investigation.